It was late afternoon in northern Arizona, a kind of dry heat that settles into your bones and makes the highway shimmer like a river of glass. The sun hung low over the red rocks outside Flagstaff, casting long shadows across a busy truck stop just off Interstate 40. Engines cooled, diesel fumes drifted through the air. Travelers moved in and out of the convenience store without looking twice at one another. And then there was the motorcycle, a deep blue Harley-Davidson, polished chrome catching the last light of the day. On its fuel tank, written in trembling, uneven strokes, were three dark letters, SOS. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if a child who could not speak asked you for help without saying a word? That afternoon, a 13-year-old girl named Emma Parker stood near the entrance of that truck stop, holding a piece of cardboard. She was thin, too thin. Her brown hair hung loosely around her shoulders, and her oversized sweatshirt did little to hide how small she was for her age. To most people passing by, she looked like another unfortunate kid asking for spare change. But if you have lived long enough, if you have raised children of your own, if you have seen fear up close, you learn to recognize the difference between hunger and terror. More than 25,000 children are reported each year to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in cases that raise concerns about exploitation or trafficking. Many of those cases begin in ordinary places, parking lots, bus stations, highway rest areas, the kind of places where people pass through and rarely look back. That is what made this moment different. 40 members of the Iron Guardians Motorcycle Club had just pulled into that same truck stop. They were not a gang. They were veterans, small business owners, mechanics, fathers and grandfathers, men in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who rode together not to intimidate the world, but to stay connected to one another after lives shaped by hard work and service. At the front of the group was Michael Carter, known to most simply as Mike, 56 years old, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, a former Army infantryman who had done his time overseas and come home with a deeper appreciation for quiet days and second chances. He had a grown daughter back in Colorado and a grandson who had just learned to ride a bicycle without training wheels. Mike killed the engine of his Harley and let the familiar ticking of cooling metal fill the silence around him. He scanned the parking lot the way he always did, not out of suspicion, out of habit. Years in uniform teach you to notice what does not fit. That is when he saw her. Emma was not calling out. She was not approaching strangers aggressively. She was simply watching. Her eyes followed the riders as they dismounted, and when her gaze met Mike's, she did not look away. There was something there. Not desperation for money, not curiosity, something heavier. Daniel Brooks, known in the club as Hawk, stepped up beside Mike. Hawk was 52, a former firefighter with a steady presence and a calm way of speaking. He followed Mike's line of sight. "You see that van?" Hawk asked quietly. About 30 yards away sat a white cargo van parked slightly apart from the other vehicles. A man in his late 30s leaned against it, pretending to scroll through his phone. He was not watching the store, he was watching the girl. Mike felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had seen this pattern before, though not on American soil, in other parts of the world, in places where children were used as tools because they were small and unlikely to fight back. Emma began to move, slowly, carefully. She walked between the parked motorcycles, her cardboard sign held close to her chest. A few of the riders reached instinctively for their wallets, but Mike lifted a hand, signaling them to wait. "Give it a minute," he said softly. Emma stopped beside Mike's Harley. She looked up at him, and for a moment the noise of the truck stop seemed to fade away. He crouched down slightly so that he was closer to her eye level. "Hey there," he said in a gentle voice. "You okay?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her lips moved. Nothing followed. Mike understood. She could not speak. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the white van. The man near it shifted his weight, his attention sharpening. Then Emma did something no one expected.
She reached toward the chrome of the motorcycle's tank. There was a small edge near the license plate bracket, something Mike had meant to smooth down weeks ago. She pressed her palm against it, hard enough to draw blood. Hawk stepped forward instinctively, but Mike extended his arm slightly to hold him back. Emma placed her hand against the polished chrome and began to write. 3 letters. SOS. They were uneven, smudged, but unmistakable. Mike's breath caught in his throat. In all his years, in all the situations he had walked into, he had never seen a plea for help that clear, that deliberate. Across the lot, the man near the van started walking toward them. Emma's eyes widened, but she did not step away. Instead, she looked up at Mike again, and in that silent look was something every parent understands without explanation. Please. In that moment, the afternoon sun, the highway noise, the rumble of engines, all of it fell into the background. What remained was a choice. At some point in life, you learn that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it is written in 3 small letters by a child who cannot speak. And sometimes the real test is whether someone is willing to read them and refuse to look away. Mike did not react with anger. He did not raise his voice. He had learned a long time ago that the first move in any serious situation is not force, it is clarity. The man from the white van approached with a forced smile, speaking quickly, explaining that the girl was his niece, that she was shy, that she sometimes acted out for attention. His tone was casual, but his grip on Emma's shoulder was not. Hawk stepped slightly to Mike's left, creating space without escalating tension. Mike looked at the man calmly. "She's hurt," he said, nodding toward Emma's hand. "We take care of it," the man replied, already trying to guide her back toward the van. Mike let them walk. That surprised a few of the younger riders, but he had no intention of creating a scene in a crowded truck stop. There were families nearby, cameras mounted on light poles, strangers who did not understand what was unfolding. Acting too quickly could make the situation worse for the child. As the van pulled away from the lot and merged onto Interstate 40, Mike turned to the group. His voice remained steady.
"We follow, at a distance." Ryan Cole, the club's technology specialist, was already stepping aside with his phone in hand. Ryan was 48, a former communications technician who now ran a small security consulting business. He did not guess, he verified. Within minutes, he had accessed publicly available vehicle registration records. The van was registered to a man named Victor Marino, 38 years old, with prior charges involving fraud and assault. None of them had led to long sentences. A pattern, not a coincidence. According to data compiled by Polaris Project, traffickers in the United States frequently use highways and truck stops because they offer anonymity and constant movement. Interstate corridors allow individuals to move across state lines quickly, making jurisdiction more complicated. It was not theory, it was documented reality. Ryan looked up from his screen. "He's got history," he said quietly, "and not the good kind." Mike nodded once. "No confrontation unless we have to. We gather information first." One of the younger members, Ethan Reed, shifted uneasily. Ethan was 30, a veteran of the Marine Corps, and still quick to act. "We could block him in at the next exit," he suggested. Mike shook his head. "Not on an open road, not with a child inside. We do this right." The group moved with discipline.
2 bikes stayed several car lengths behind the van. Others staggered farther back, blending into traffic. They were not chasing, they were observing. Ryan activated a small magnetic tracking device from his saddlebag at a rest stop 15 miles down the highway. The maneuver was simple and quiet, no confrontation, no alarm. The van continued north, unaware. The desert landscape grew wider and emptier as they drove. Mike listened to the wind in his helmet and thought about Emma's eyes, about the deliberate way she had written those letters. A child does not injure herself lightly, especially not in public, especially not unless she believes there is no other way to be heard. After nearly an hour, the van exited onto a secondary road heading toward a sparsely populated ranching area. The tracker confirmed the vehicle had slowed near a fenced property with a long dirt driveway. Satellite imagery on Ryan's tablet showed a main house and 2 outbuildings. Mike exhaled slowly. "We do not move in," he said. "Not yet."
He pulled the group to a stop well out of sight. This was no longer about instinct, it was about responsibility. "We contact the authorities," he continued. "Full report, location, vehicle, everything." The Iron Guardians were not vigilantes, they were citizens. They understood the limits of their role. Acting without coordination could jeopardize any case built later in court. Evidence mattered, procedure mattered. The safety of the children mattered most of all. Ryan placed a call to the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, providing the information they had gathered. He also transmitted the live tracking data. Within minutes, Special Agent Laura Bennett returned the call. Her tone was direct but professional. She asked precise questions about the vehicle, the driver, and the condition of the child. Mike answered each one carefully. Agent Bennett confirmed that Victor Marino was under investigation in connection with suspected interstate exploitation activity. They had been tracking him for months, but had struggled to obtain solid evidence tying him to specific locations. "You may have just given us the missing piece," she said. Mike looked out across the desert horizon. The sun was lowering now, casting long shadows over the scrubland. "We're not looking for credit. We're looking for those kids to be safe." The plan was set quickly. Federal agents would mobilize to the area. Local law enforcement units unaffiliated with the suspected corruption network would assist. The Iron Guardians would remain nearby only to provide real-time visual confirmation and step back once authorities arrived. As they waited, Mike reflected on something he had learned years ago. Courage without discipline can create chaos, but courage paired with patience can save lives. Inside that fenced property, Emma was likely not alone. Statistics suggested that when one child is exploited, others are often nearby. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has repeatedly emphasized that community reporting plays a critical role in identifying victims. Most cases do not begin with dramatic raids. They begin with someone noticing something that does not sit right. That afternoon, noticing had made all the difference. Headlights appeared in the distance as federal vehicles approached under fading light. The operation that followed would be conducted by professionals with warrants and authority. The Iron Guardians had done their part. They had chosen to not look away.
Darkness settled slowly over the Arizona desert as federal vehicles positioned themselves beyond the ridge. Red and blue lights were kept off. This was not a spectacle. It was a coordinated operation built on evidence, timing, and the priority of protecting children above all else. Mike and the Iron Guardians remained where Agent Laura Bennett had instructed them to stay, far enough away to avoid interfering, close enough to provide confirmation if needed. The tracker signal remained steady on Ryan's tablet. The white van had not moved. A short time later, Agent Bennett's voice came through Ryan's phone. "We have visual confirmation of multiple minors inside the secondary structure. We are moving in."
Mike closed his eyes briefly. He had been in operations before, but this one felt different. There were no opposing armies here, only children waiting for someone to notice. The entry itself was swift and controlled. Law enforcement units secured the perimeter while federal agents executed the warrant. There was no dramatic chaos, no shouting that carried across the desert, just disciplined movement and clear commands. Within minutes, the first update came through. 4 minors located inside the van structure, additional juveniles in the north building. Mike felt Hawk's hand rest briefly on his shoulder. Neither man spoke. They did not need to. Over the next 20 minutes, the full picture emerged. 19 children were found on the property, boys and girls ranging in age from approximately 9 to 15, malnourished, frightened, but alive. Emma was among the first escorted out, wrapped in a blanket provided by paramedics. Her eyes searched the darkness until they found Mike standing at a distance behind the federal line. She did not run to him, she did not wave, but she held his gaze, and in that look was recognition. She had been heard. Agent Bennett approached the group once the scene was secured. "We have the primary suspect in custody, along with 2 associates," she said. "We also recovered digital records that will help us identify additional locations." Ryan quietly provided the tracking data and the earlier vehicle documentation, which agents incorporated into their evidence log. Everything was documented properly, every step preserved for court. Among the children escorted from the North Building was an 11-year-old girl with red hair pulled back into a loose braid. She looked dazed but alert. When Emma saw her, something changed. Emma stepped forward instinctively, despite the blanket around her shoulders. She reached for the girl's hand. Agent Bennett paused. "Do they know each other?" she asked. Mike answered softly. "That's her sister." The red-haired girl's name was Sophia Parker. 8 months earlier, Sophia had been reported missing from Tucson. Her case had circulated through regional alerts, but had never been resolved until that night. When the 2 sisters stood face to face, there were no dramatic words. Emma still struggled to speak. Trauma does that. It steals sound before it steals memory. But she pressed her forehead gently against Sophia's, and both girls began to cry in the quiet, exhausted way children cry when fear finally loosens its grip. Paramedics evaluated each child carefully. Dehydration, minor untreated injuries, signs of prolonged neglect, but no immediate life-threatening conditions. That mattered. As the children were transported to a nearby community center arranged by local child services, Agent Bennett returned to Mike one more time. "I want you to understand something," she said. "We have been monitoring Victor Marino's network for nearly 2 years. We suspected multiple properties, but could never tie him directly to one with children present. Your decision to observe and report gave us probable cause to move." Mike shook his head slightly. It wasn't strategy, it was 3 letters. Agent Bennett allowed herself a small nod. Sometimes that is enough. Over the following days, the investigation widened. Digital evidence recovered from the ranch property revealed contacts across state lines. Financial records tied the suspect to transactions that were already under review by federal analysts. The case would expand beyond Arizona, but that would unfold in courtrooms and briefing rooms far from public view. For Emma and Sophia, the immediate focus was safety and stabilization. Child advocacy specialists met with them in a secure, supportive environment. Trauma counselors began careful evaluations. According to federal data, recovery from prolonged exploitation is a process measured not in days, but in months and sometimes years. But the first step is always the same: safety.
When Mike and a few members of the Iron Guardians were invited by Child Services to visit briefly at the community center, they removed their vests before walking inside, not out of shame, out of respect. The room was quiet, painted in soft colors. Volunteers moved gently, offering warm meals and clean clothes.
Emma sat beside Sophia at a small table. A notebook lay open in front of her. When she saw Mike, she picked up a pen. Her handwriting was careful and slow. "Thank you for seeing me." Mike felt his throat tighten in a way he had not expected. He pulled out a chair, but kept a respectful distance. "You were the brave one," he said. "You made sure we noticed." Sophia looked between them, confusion giving way to understanding as Emma showed her the letters she had written on the motorcycle tank. SOS. Agent Bennett later confirmed that community tips account for a significant percentage of trafficking case breakthroughs nationwide. Neighbors, teachers, truck drivers, ordinary citizens who trust their instincts and make a call. That afternoon at the truck stop, the Iron Guardians had not acted as heroes. They had acted as witnesses who refused to dismiss what they saw. 19 children were now under protective care. 3 suspects were in federal custody. Additional warrants were being prepared in other states. And a 13-year-old girl who had once believed she had no voice had found that sometimes being seen is enough to start being heard again. In the weeks that followed, life did not simply return to normal. It moved forward, carefully and deliberately, like someone learning to walk again after a long illness. Federal prosecutors built their case step by step, supported by digital records, financial trails, and the testimony of trained investigators. The ranch property was sealed. Additional arrests were made in neighboring states as evidence linked the network across state lines. What had once operated in shadows was now documented in court filings and federal reports. For the children, progress looked quieter. Emma and Sophia were placed with a licensed foster family experienced in trauma-informed care. They began regular counseling sessions through a child advocacy center. According to national child welfare data, long-term recovery depends heavily on stable environments, consistent therapy, and community support. Safety is the first chapter. Healing is the rest of the book. Mike visited only once more that month, at the invitation of the caseworker. He did not bring his motorcycle. He did not wear his vest. He brought a simple gift instead, 2 journals with sturdy covers and unlined pages.
"You don't have to talk until you're ready," he told Emma gently. "But you can always write." She nodded. Sophia, still adjusting to the rhythm of safety, held her sister's hand tightly. The 2 girls had begun sleeping through the night for the first time in months. That alone felt like a miracle. Back at the Iron Guardians clubhouse, the atmosphere was different, not celebratory, reflective. 40 men sat around a long wooden table, coffee cups in hand, listening as Ryan shared updates that had been publicly released. The case had expanded to include financial crimes, interstate transport violations, and conspiracy charges. Federal sentencing guidelines meant that if convicted, those responsible would face significant prison time. Hawk leaned back in his chair. "All because a kid wrote 3 letters," he said quietly. Mike shook his head. "Not because she wrote them, because we read them." There is a lesson in that distinction. It is easy to believe that heroism requires strength or authority, a badge, a title, a uniform. But the truth is simpler and in many ways more demanding. It requires attention. It requires the willingness to slow down in a world that moves too fast.
It requires looking twice when something feels wrong. Across the United States, community reporting remains one of the strongest tools in preventing child exploitation. Federal agencies consistently remind citizens that suspicious activity at truck stops, rest areas, motels, and other transit points should be reported to the proper authorities. Not confronted recklessly, reported responsibly. Most investigations begin not with dramatic rescues, but with someone deciding that silence is not acceptable. That afternoon, outside Flagstaff, Mike had felt the old instinct stir inside him, the urge to act immediately, to take control. But age had taught him something youth often overlooks. Discipline protects more people than anger ever will. A month later, Emma surprised her counselor by speaking a single word during a session. It was soft, fragile, but unmistakable. Safe. Recovery would take time. There would be setbacks, there always are. Trauma does not disappear because a door opens. But the foundation had shifted. The girls were no longer invisible. On a cool evening in early autumn, Mike finally washed his motorcycle. The Arizona dust had settled thick over the chrome. For weeks he had left the tank untouched, the faint outline of those 3 letters still visible in his memory, even after they had faded from sight.
As water ran over the metal, he paused for a moment. He did not want to forget, but he also understood that healing means allowing wounds to close. When he finished, the chrome shone again under the fading sun, clean, reflective, ready for the road ahead. The Iron Guardians continued to ride, as they always had. Weekend charity events, fundraisers for veterans, community barbecues. They were not chasing danger. They were not looking for headlines. They were simply present in the places where life unfolds. Sometimes that is enough. If there is one thing this story asks of you, it is this: pay attention. Trust your instincts. If something does not sit right, report it through the proper channels. Support organizations that protect children. Volunteer in your community. Have difficult conversations when necessary. Awareness is not dramatic, it is steady. You do not need a badge to care. You do not need authority to notice. You only need the courage to refuse to look away. Emma once believed she had no voice, but in truth, her voice was never gone. It was written in determination. It was carried in her eyes. It was heard by someone willing to listen. And sometimes, in a country as vast as ours, change begins not with sirens or speeches, but with 3 quiet letters and a decision made in the span of a heartbeat. The road stretches long across the desert. Engines rumble. The sun sets and rises again. Somewhere, another child may be waiting for someone to see what others ignore. The question is not whether heroes exist. The question is whether we are paying attention.